Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and the iPhone 11 in 2024 may or may not make sense, but it is the last of its kind. So I wanted to help you decide whether or not you should pick one of these up. We'll talk about the display, which is a bit controversial, but there are reasons you would want this display, as well as its battery life, durability, and much more. Now, when I say this is the last of its kind, what I mean is it's the last LCD display iPhone that has Face ID. So Apple could release something such as an iPhone SE 4, fourth generation with an LCD, but it looks like everything is going to be OLED from now on. So that could be a reason you would want this, but first let's talk about price. This is currently about $250 to $300 renewed. So if you're getting it renewed or used, maybe it had a cracked display, you can get them fairly reasonable. I probably wouldn't pick one of these up new as they're still around $400 to $500, but at the renewed price, that's very reasonable, making this maybe the best budget phone in 2024 if you want to try out an iPhone. The overall design is one that many people love, with its curved edges, which we don't really have now. We did get flattened edges with the iPhone 12, and now with the iPhone 15 and 15 Pro Max, it does curve over to the edge, making it more comfortable, but it's still not anywhere near the comfort of one of these phones. However, the curved edges do make it a little bit more slippery, but it's still incredibly comfortable to hold just because of the curved edges and its overall size. So it's one of the best phones as far as the ergonomics go, I think. And if we take a look at the bottom, of course, it still has lightning. So if you have a bunch of lightning accessories, now that Apple's getting rid of that, going to USB-C, I think it makes sense that this would be a great budget phone. As far as the durability of the phone, the anodized coating is held up really well. It's this green color on this phone. Of course, you have other options, but this is bumped up into different phones, been thrown into a drawer with other phones without a case on it, thrown into backpacks, and over the years is held up really well. If we look on the bottom, there's no issues with the lightning port, no issues with the speakers, and even the camera glass, which is sapphire. Whether or not it's really great sapphire doesn't really seem to matter here, as it's held up well. No scratches there. So overall, this seems to be a pretty durable phone. When it comes to the front glass, it seems to have held up better probably than my ceramic shield on my 15 Pro Max so far. I have used this full time for some time, and you can see we do have some scratches here, and that's occurred over time, but given the age of the phone, and like I said, that it's bumped into others, if we compare that with my 15 Pro Max, it looks pretty terrible. The 15 Pro Max has scratches all over it, and I've treated it the exact same way with care, placed it in my right pocket every single time, and still it has issues with overall durability. So I think this phone, durability-wise, especially if you're going to put it in a case, seems to be a good way to go. Now, as far as the display, that's where it's a little controversial, as many people said, well, it's super low resolution. It's 1,792 by 828 pixels with 326 pixels per inch. On an LCD, 326 pixels per inch is key, as you really can't see the pixels. Now, there are disadvantages to this, not being an OLED. It's not as bright right now. It also doesn't have maybe the same quality with blacks and brightness, of course. So if you're on an all black display, maybe you're using dark mode, you're not going to gain any battery advantages for that. And also it only goes up to 625 nits of brightness, as you can see outside next to the 15 Pro Max, which is much brighter. It's still viewable in sunlight, but isn't as good. But one major advantage this has is no PWM. It doesn't flash the display faster or slower depending on your brightness level, and if you're sensitive to that, which is about 1 in 10 people, this doesn't have it at all, and it's very easy to look at this display. It won't bother your eyes, it won't make you feel nauseated, it won't cause strain to your eyes. It's just a great display that way. No, you can't see the pixels, maybe around the little edges here, but I've said this in the past. I've shown this to people that are professional photographers, videographers, and they actually said the display looks great. So without knowing what it was, when it was newer, I showed it to people with the XR, and they said it looked fine. They had it right next to their iPhone, no complaints. So based off specs, it doesn't sound great, but when you see it, it seems to be just fine. Face ID is plenty fast for most people. It's not going to be as good as the latest phones, but it unlocks nice and fast, no issues there. And when it comes to battery, this has a 3,110 milliamp hour battery. Now that's about 1 hour more than the iPhone XR when it released, but I wanted to show you some current battery specs and show you what it's doing on the latest updates. So if we go into settings, I'll show you on this phone first. Now we can't see our cycle count, but you can see that here with Coconut battery. And if we go into battery, battery health and charging, this phone is down to 98%. Now, granted, I did not use this full time for a long time, but I wanted to show you a phone that has been used for a long time full time. So thanks to a user that's on my Telegram channel, they sent this in with their iPhone 11. So first, let's go over to battery health, and you'll see they're down to 84%. On the latest updates, you'll see that they're getting about 4 to 5 hours, depending on what they're using it for. In some cases, maybe a little bit more. So about 4 to 7 hours in typical use. This day in particular seems to be about average, with 5 hours and 30 minutes of screen on time, and they had about 75 to 80% of their battery life left. It seems to be a pretty good phone that way, and there's a couple reasons for that. One of the reasons is it has 4G. It does not have 5G. 4G uses less power, it's more power efficient, and so without 5G, you're not going to get those blazing fast speeds. But if you don't need that, and most people honestly won't notice that, you'll get better battery life. So in general, you'll have that. Of course, you can use Wi-Fi and everything else, and 4G was pretty power efficient at this point. It does have an Intel modem, which could have caused some issues for some people, but in general, the battery life is decent because of that, and it doesn't have to push as many pixels. So when you don't have super high resolution displays, you don't have ProMotion where it's super smooth. It's good at 60 Hertz, but it's not super smooth at 120 Hertz. It's plenty fine for the average user looking for a budget phone, no problems there, and they still offer 60 Hertz in the iPhone 15. So you need the Pro models to get the higher frame rate. So just keep in mind that this is going to be great, especially for the budget users, and you'll save power because you're not pushing all those extra pixels. Now also, the phone will charge wirelessly, but it does not have MagSafe. So you can use MagSafe on the back and it will actually charge the phone, but it doesn't have MagSafe, so it will actually stay put. But you can wirelessly charge with a Qi compatible charger, and it will charge 50% in 30 minutes wired and a little bit slower with the compatible Qi charger. So at about 7.5 watts instead of about 20. But either way, you have that option if you want to wirelessly charge this. When it comes to the overall speed, well, it uses the A13 Bionic. We are up to the A17 Pro now. It has 4 gigs of RAM. You can see that in Geekbench. This is an older version, but you'll see that here. And running games, it's just fine. So if we go into something such as Real Racing 3 here. Now we're in Real Racing 3, and as we swipe through the menus, this is nice and smooth. Even on an iPhone 15 Pro Max, sometimes that's a little stuttery or slow, but if we go to race, it does take a little bit longer to load the game, but in general, it's nice and fast, completely playable. So we'll give it a second here so you can see, but it's completely playable. Things are nice and smooth, as good as the 15 Pro Max when it comes to this. Of course, you can't play the actual AAA games, maybe Resident Evil or something like that, but you can play games such as Real Racing. So Minecraft, Real Racing, everything's going to be nice and fast. The phone will get a little bit warm because of that, but that's nothing out of the ordinary for an iPhone, as they tend to be hot in general. Now, when it comes to the cameras, they still hold up pretty well. Now, the forward-facing camera is still a 12-megapixel camera in the 15 models, and it's a 12-megapixel here. It has an f2.2 aperture, can record 4K 60, but doesn't have HDR. One of the disadvantages is no autofocus on the front-facing camera, but it still looks pretty good. In fact, let's go in and take a look at the camera now. We'll spin it around, and we'll record some video. And this is the forward-facing video from the iPhone 11. So this gives you an idea of what it's like compared to what you saw from the camera overhead. In general, it's pretty good if you just want to record, whether that's on YouTube or TikTok or something else. You could definitely use this along with FaceTime as well. And so that's pretty great. And then, of course, we have 2 cameras on the back. We have a wide and ultra wide, again, 12 megapixel, but 4K 60 video, again, no HDR. But take a look at a few different photos here. This gives you an idea of what it looks like. And in general, it does a great job. In fact, some people may prefer this over the heavy processing that some of the newer models give it. So the processor in here, they seem to be very neutral. They seem to be decent, and people looking for a budget will be very happy with this for a budget phone. Now we have a speaker on the top and also one on the bottom to go along with our microphone. Let's take a listen to them, see how loud they get, measuring them with a decibel meter on the Apple Watch, and also play some royalty-free music here so you can hear it, and I'll move my microphone. So we'll go into the decibel level meter and tilt the microphone. Overall, the speakers sound pretty good. At the highest levels, they distort a little bit, but that's pretty typical of any iPhone at the very highest level. And in general, they sound nice and clear. Not as good as the 15 Pro Max. They don't give as good of a stereo sound, but in general, quite good, especially that these are quite old as well, about 5 years old. So I think the speakers have held up well. They're plenty loud at 88 decibels, so that seems to be great compared to what we have now, which the 15 Pro Max goes to about the same level. As far as anything else, well, we do have IP67 water resistance, 2 meters for up to 30 minutes. And as far as future iOS support, well, I would think iOS 18 would come to this. We don't know that 100%, but maybe 18, 19, we don't really know 100% at this point. It seems like Apple may get rid of it this year. They got rid of the iPhone 10. I would think they would get rid of the 10s if anything this year and keep the 11 since we have 4 gigs of RAM. Maybe not, but we'll have to wait and see. But typically Apple will give at least security updates for a few more years, 7 years, maybe even longer. So if you want the latest updates as far as security, you'll be able to get that. And as far as an entry-level phone with Face ID, I think this one's hard to beat, especially for its price. If you want something that's easy on the eyes, it's cheap to buy and own. If maybe you crack a display, they're pretty reasonable to replace. They're also very reasonable to replace the battery. Apple can replace the battery, or you can replace it yourself if you know how to do that and you have the tools to do that. And if we take a look at the battery replacement, Apple says the iPhone 11 costs $89 to replace the battery. Again, you can get them from third parties for less, but Apple will warrant that. And in general, it's a fairly inexpensive phone to own. You could buy 3 to 5 of these for the price of the 15 Pro Max. So if you wanted one of these, something you don't have to worry about, maybe you break phones often, probably go for one of the older ones as they'll seem to be fairly reasonable to replace. So I think it's a great budget phone. It's not going to have the latest specs, but it will definitely perform as you would expect. Going into music, going into Safari, going into different games. Of course, you won't have 5G, but that's more efficient with battery. Now, if you own an iPhone 11, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below and let me know what you think of it. Is it something people should still pick up if they can get one fairly reasonable? Are you still using one? And do you prefer it because it doesn't have PWM? Let me know in the comments below. I'll link this wallpaper in the description like I normally do, and if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.